And welcome back to Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christy Matino. Of course, we continue to follow the latest with President Trump and his trip to China, meeting with President Xi there. Now, President Trump is in Beijing for these crucial meetings with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Some experts are saying a few breakthroughs are expected on divisive issues such as the Iran war, trade, technology, and Taiwan. Now, in a closed-door meeting, Xi warned Trump that differences over Taiwan, which is a self-governed island that Beijing claims as its own territory, could bring the U.S. and China into clashes or conflict. Now, President Trump in December authorized an $11 billion arms package for Taiwan, but has not yet moved forward with delivery. President Trump hopes to focus talks on trade and deals for China to buy more agricultural products and passenger planes, setting up a board to address their differences and avoid a repeat of the trade war ignited last year after President Trump's tariff hikes. Now, the war with Iran is also likely to be a key topic here over the next day or so. Ahead of the meetings, President Trump hoped China would use its considerable leverage to prod Iran to agree to U.S. terms to end the two-month-old war or reopen the critical Strait of Hormuz. But he has tempered those calls ahead of that summit. Now, we heard earlier from President Trump and President Xi at this state banquet, and we have a lot of questions. You have a lot of questions at home about that meeting. Also, what we can expect tomorrow as well as these meetings do continue. So for that, I want to bring in Iran war and China expert, former IDF commander and Bond CEO, Duran Kempel, to join us here on Live Now from Fox. Thank you so much for taking the time. We truly appreciate it here this morning.
Thank you for having me, Christy.
A lot of viewer questions, as I said, but I wanted to start with this. Just about an hour or so ago, we saw that state banquet. We heard from both President Trump and President Xi. Was there anything in particular that really stuck out to you from either leader's comments?
Thank you. So let's help the audience put all of this in perspective. This is the major chess game that is being played in the world today. This is about world order. These are the two main powers. Just so everybody has a sense, between China and the United States, half of the emissions of the world. In other words, this is where the action is. All the other chess games that we hear about, metaphor, of course, everything that happens in the Gulf and Iran, Venezuela, the Ukraine-Russia war, all of those are leverage points that lead up to the dialogue between Trump, the United States, and Xi, China. Now, one more thing for the audience to remember. The dialogue has three levels. There is the level that we can see on television. It's going to be very polite, and everything is going to be referenced at very high level. Then there's going to be the level that we are not going to see, and that is the one-on-one conversations in rooms, not in public. And then there's the level that is being played, but they're not going to talk about because it's not polite. For instance, CIA activities and similar activities by China. With that backdrop, let's go back to your question, Christy. So both leaders, of course, were very polite, as we expect them to be. We're in a very modern era. They talk about the genesis of the two nations, the great opportunities, the friendships. President Trump is always very complimentary and diplomatic vis-a-vis whomever he's speaking with. And then the 2 points beyond the diplomatic comments that President Trump referenced has to do with avoiding confrontation. Remember, there are two main topics, and that's security from external risks to each country, and stability. That's the inner stability of the country. And within that context, Trump said, let's avoid confrontation. That's the security element. And then he said, let's make sure, I'm paraphrasing, that we have fair commerce. That has to do with stability. Because if we cannot provide jobs in the United States, or if Xi cannot provide jobs in China, people are going to be in the streets as opposed to watching Christie on Fox Live Now. So Trump focused on those 2 points. Xi similarly wanted to make sure that we have successful commercial relationship, but then he referenced Taiwan and how important Taiwan is to China and the vision of China, which Xi hopes to realize in his lifetime, which is to make Taiwan part of China. This is a major issue, and that is one of the points that are harder to negotiate around. But those are the 2 points that stuck to me, Christy, in the bigger context of security and stability. This is the major chess game, and it's played at 3 levels: the level that we see on television, the level that is going to be conducted in private, and the level that even they don't talk about.
And before we get to those viewer questions, I do just quickly want to touch a bit more on Taiwan since you just brought it up. Xi Jinping warned that differences over Taiwan could bring the U.S. and China into clashes or conflict. Those were his words. Now, how significant really is that warning in the context of current tensions? And I guess more specifically here, Duran, how is President Trump's approval of an $11 billion arms package for Taiwan influencing these discussions between the U.S. and China ahead of the summit? Just diving a little bit deeper in here.
So this is incredibly important. And by Xi referencing Taiwan as something that is very important to him, from a negotiating perspective, he's sending President Trump a message. He says, whatever you want me to give you, because in negotiation, there's a give and take, I'd like to get something with regard to Taiwan. Now, why is Taiwan so important to China? One reason that may be less meaningful to most of us in the modern Western world is the history of China. They think that this is a part of the Chinese heritage and people, and they want it for those, let's call it sentimental historical reasons. In addition, from a security perspective, they don't want this island armed with all U.S. capabilities right next door. So they view it as a potential threat. Just like we, the United States, didn't want Soviet missiles in Cuba or in Venezuela. We don't want next door any missiles or any arms aspects. So that's another dimension of Taiwan. And then there's, of course, the semiconductor industry. We all understand that semiconductors today are essential to the global economy. And Taiwan today is the main source of semiconductors. So the US cannot see Taiwan and the semiconductor industry become part of China. But it could be that in the next 5 or 10 years, Taiwan and their semiconductor industry becomes less meaningful as they build more factories in the US, but that's going to take a long time. So in my sense, the US cannot see Taiwan become part of China. That will also destabilize Japan, South Korea, and other partners that we have in that particular area, because remember, from Xi's perspective, he would like a regional hegemony for security and stability reasons. That regional hegemony for Xi means Japan, South Korea, perhaps even Australia and other countries in the area. India is too big to swallow. So Taiwan is very important. I don't see a scenario where the US allows China to consume Taiwan. But maybe in the dialogue, Trump can promise something over the course of the next 5 or 10 years. Notice that everything that happens 5 or 10 years from now already happens in a different administration after 2028. So I think that this Taiwan issue is a sticking point, and if it's very important to China, and since we, the West, the United States, cannot give it up because of all the reasons that I mentioned, there needs to be something else that we give China in order to make them happy. And there are things that are important to China. For instance, they need oil. 50% of their oil comes from the Gulf. Who's now controlling the flow of oil from the Gulf? The US does. So if you ask yourself, why has it been so important for the US to be able to control the flow of oil out of the Straits of Hormuz? This is oil that goes to China. This is now a very important leverage point in the dialogue between Trump and Xi. So maybe we can't give him points on Taiwan, but we can release some oil. Also, Venezuela is oil, and Venezuela is now part of US, let's call it influence and control. The next thing that is incredibly important to China, in order for China to achieve stability or to maintain stability internally, they need their economy to continue growing. It cannot grow without selling their products into Europe and the United States. The US is the largest market in the world. China needs to continue feeding it. And my sense is that much of the dialogue and much of what President Trump will give Xi will be oil from the Gulf, or flow of oil, undisrupted. That's critical for the economy of China, and access to the US markets. But in return, he will want perhaps help of China relative to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, help with China with regard to the Iranian conflict, perhaps less fentanyl into the United States, and access to rare minerals. There's much more, but I think that this is the major set of issues, Christy.
And I wanted to make sure that we touched on Taiwan before we get to some of these viewer questions, potentially even more questions coming from our viewers there. And I'm going to pull that up in just a moment, but I also just wanted to let our viewers know, and you, that we are potentially expecting a live image of President Trump to pop up here. I don't see him as of yet, but if he does, we're going to head to that, take him live. In the meantime, though, Duran, let's get to some of these viewer questions, and I just wanted to share some of them here with you. Starting with this one from Stanley. He says, President Trump's visit to China is very much strategic, most especially with the ongoing issue of Iran. Will there be a fruitful result from President Trump's visit to China with the issue of the U.S. has with Iran, the Iran war?
Shall I respond to that, Christy?
Yes, would love to get your response.
Okay, so the fact that we're having these two leaders meet is important to all of us. It's very important that China and the U.S. speak. It's very important that President Trump establish rapport with Xi. These interpersonal relationships are incredibly important and meaningful. So I'm confident that this meeting is very important. We should all be very happy that it happens. A lot of the progress and a lot of the agreements are going to be quiet and ones that are not communicated to us. For instance, if President Trump is asking Xi in return, for instance, for more access or less tariffs, access into the US market, to help a little bit with our friend Putin with regard to getting the Ukraine-Russia war to end, this is not necessarily something that is going to be communicated. Similarly, I think the Chinese play a very important role relative to Iran, per your question. And think about it, Iran is playing for China and for Russia. What is the role that Iran plays in this bigger global chess game? Iran is a kinetic force that Russia can apply against us, against the West. This is what Iran is doing. Iran is building nuclear capabilities that have a lot of missiles. They're basically interrupting the West on behalf of China. What we want, the West, the United States, is to neutralize Iran as such a threat. The best solution is get Iran to play for us, for the West. In other words, choose democracy over tyranny. That, in my humble opinion, is still in play because despite the fact that we're not talking about regime change, notice that it's not really clear who's managing Iran right now. And it could very well be that the CIA and the Mossad, who are not in the ceasefire and are not on vacation, are still working on making sure that the person whom we deal with in Iran is somebody whom we want to work with. I hope you can see me. I think that the image is frozen. So I think that China plays a very important role relative to Iran because though we are getting progress done with Iran ourselves, the US with the help of Israel, President Trump can ask Xi to stop using Iran as a kinetic enforcer or a pit bull, if I may. And they might reach that particular agreement that in return for free flow of oil, access to the US markets, access to Venezuelan oil, Iran will be able to do that. Again, I don't expect that to be communicated publicly, but I expect progress on those dimensions to be on the table.
Another question here for you, Duran, and we can hear you loud and clear. You're not frozen, so thank you for checking in. But I wanted to share this one with you. This is going back to Taiwan, that discussion we were just having. With tensions growing over Taiwan and trade with China, what would President Trump's actual plan be to avoid a major economic crisis while still confronting China?
So this is a key point and one that there's very little latitude around. The U.S. cannot afford to allow China to consume Taiwan because that's going to destabilize the whole region. Japan, South Korea, even Australia are going to feel that they're next for the same reason that we can't allow Ukraine to be consumed by Russia. So the question is, what can we give President Xi instead? I think we need to make it clear, and President Trump will make it clear, that they cannot consume Taiwan. But there could be a roadmap whereby the two countries become more friendly, and maybe the U.S. sends less weapon systems into Taiwan, such that Taiwan doesn't present a risk to China. But I think that there are ways to get a lot of progress done between China and the U.S. without allowing Taiwan to be consumed by Russia. Taiwan continues to offer semiconductors to China, certain level of semiconductors, access to the US markets, and in return, what she needs to help us with is Ukraine-Russia conflict and neutralize Iran.
Another question for you here, and we're going to try to get one or two more in. How trustworthy are any deals with China? And I'll add to this question that, even if no major agreements emerge from this visit, what should we watch for as signs that the relationship between President Trump and Xi Jinping is either stabilizing or deteriorating?
First of all, let's take a look at China. They're mainly a competitor of ours.
My colleague, Christy.
Just cruising around on another Saturday morning. Go down to Coffee Pot Bayou and see if there's any dolphins hanging out. Peace out. Pope of St. Pete wishing you blessed Sunday and Saturday.